Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great Friday show for you as always. I'm always happy when I see Amber because I know it's the end of the week.
We're getting close.
How you doing today?
Oh, I'm hanging in there.
I like the blue suit.
Thank you. I got sick during the storm, so I'm still fighting for my life, but we're going to get through it.
Well, it's a good time to get sick. It's worse when you get sick in the summertime.
That's
and then
true.
you're like, why is it hot?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
this is the perfect time. I hope you feel better.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Coming up on Rising, federal agents have arrested former CNN host Don Lemon after he entered a church during an anti-ICE protest.
Plus, President Trump made some comments about housing during his cabinet meeting that really raised some eyebrows, even on the right.
And Minnesota Governor Tim Walz said he is never running for office again. But first, Lindsey, what's in your lens?
We're talking about Georgia. When you hear the word FBI raid and elections facility in the same sentence, it immediately hits a nerve in this country. Because for years now, the lie that the 2020 election was stolen has been used like a match near dry grass. And now investigators with the Federal Bureau of Investigations have raided an elections facility in Atlanta, searching for materials related to the 2020 election. This happened at the Fulton County Election Hub in Union City, a place that has been at the center of election denial. Claims and part of that sweeping Georgia case against President Trump that ultimately fell apart and was dropped. But let's be clear about what's happening here. This isn't about election integrity. This is about obsession. An obsession with the fact that President Trump lost the race and a refusal to move on. Because the truth is the 2020 election, guys, was just not stolen. President Joe Biden won. States certified the results. Congress accepted the results. Biden was inaugurated in January 2021. Election security officials, including Republicans and people in Trump's own administration, said the election was secure. And when fraud happened, it was isolated and did not change the outcome. In 4 years, Trump and his allies have produced no evidence of widespread fraud. And we cannot forget what this looked like in real time. There was that hour-long call on January 2nd, 2020, with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, first reported by the Washington Post, where Trump recycled debunked claims about dead voters, ineligible voters, mystery ballots, rigged machines. And still, Raffensperger insisted Georgia's election was fair and accurate. And then days later, Gabriel Sterling, a Republican and Georgia's voting system implementation manager, publicly batted down multiple false claims. And in that Raffensperger phone call, Trump asked him to find 11,780 votes, the exact number he needed to win the state. Prosecutors allege that Trump's team was planning to submit a slate of electors to try to give Trump the victory, while also pushing access to voting machine data. So when we see the FBI show up now with a court order to seize physical ballots, ballot images, and voter rolls from Fulton County's 2020 election, I think a lot of Americans are asking the same question. Why are we still here?
What should particularly concern us is, guess who showed up at this FBI raid? Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard has nothing to do with election security. Tulsi Gabbard has even been in charge of dismantling what was called the Foreign Malign Influence Center to try to make sure foreign countries don't interfere in our elections. This complete Trump loyalist somehow popping up on an FBI raid? What the heck was she doing?
And even beyond the raid itself, it's the pattern that stands out. This comes after the DOJ issued a complaint against Fulton County in December over 2020 election information. And it comes after the DOJ attempts to investigate Trump's perceived political enemies, including New York Attorney General Letitia James and former FBI Director James Comey, cases that were dismissed after a judge ruled Trump's handpicked prosecutor was unlawfully appointed. U.S. Senator John Ossoff responded and didn't mince words. Quote, after losing Georgia in 2020, Donald Trump demanded state officials find votes to change the outcome, tried to use DOJ to overturn it, and spread conspiracy theories that led to the January 6th sacking of the U.S. Capitol. He went on, quote, I suspect today's raid is a continuation of this sore losers crusade, despite repeated audits and independent reviews confirming that Donald Trump was indeed defeated. Now, Georgia Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock also released a statement saying, quote, the FBI should be focused on going after violent criminals, not carrying out political errands for a vengeful president. Republicans and Democrats agree the 2020 elections were accurate and secure. End of story. And that's really the bottom line. The country cannot keep relitigating an election that was decided, certified, reviewed, and confirmed. Look, people can be mad about losing. That's politics. But we can't keep rewriting reality every time someone doesn't like the outcome.
All right, so let's get into this. Were some things related to the Fulton County, specifically their tabulations and ballots, that were concerning, and I do think deserve and warrant an investigation. There were 6 individuals who were working on the polls who signed affidavits claiming that they witnessed malpractice in the counting of the ballots, and there was a court order demanding Fulton County turn over some of that data to election integrity groups. They never did. And just recently, last year, we found out that there were over 300,000 ballots that did not have poll worker signatures on them, as is required by state law. So I think, if the DOJ is able to get access to this and at least provide some assurance to a lot of people who do have concerns about what happened in the Fulton County process, even if it doesn't come out in Trump's favor, I think that would go a long way to people actually having greater trust in the system.
Yeah, I think people can say we don't trust local officials, but I also then think that the rebuttal to that is that local officials or people in Georgia or the American public may look at the administration and say, well, why should we trust now the FBI that raided and took these documents to bring them back exactly as is, to not change anything, to bring everything back in its original form? And that's some of the concern of the people that are even neutrally in this. Like, you guys are just taking all of the information, and now we don't know, like, what is the order of oversight involved in this to make sure that everything returns in its exact form, or we just have to take the federal government's word for it. And I think even recently it's more prevalent because of the response in Minnesota, which we're going to talk about and have been talking about for weeks. But we know that the federal government sometimes jumps to conclusions or tries to make their point quickly because it benefits them. That's happened. That's been an example for us most prevalently recently. So I think that that's the concern, is like, why are we relitigating this? Like you said, even if it's not in Trump's favor, if Democrats and several Republicans, maybe they're not saying it now, but said it privately or said it right after January 6th that this election was certified, why are funds and timing going here, trying to nitpick and find something in this county? And I've been critical of Fani Willis, just to be clear about the full case. I'm on record going off about the fact that that ball was dropped in hiring your boyfriend and everything that happened. But also, Trump's prosecutor got let go while Letitia James is not getting prosecuted. So everybody is making these mistakes of putting the wrong people in wrong positions. But I just think that we need to focus at hand. Like, Trump lost the election, and that's just a fact. And I think the fact that we are continuously talking about January 6th and seeing what happened, and people are still believing that the election was stolen, that's the bigger problem to me.
I guess there were verified instances, though, in the 2020 election of issues with chain of custody for the ballots, issues with ballots being certified past the election date that was supposed to be allowed by law, state law. There were issues with individual poll workers signing affidavits in multiple states saying that the process wasn't done correctly. And the reason why we didn't really get closure on this, in my opinion, is because pretty much all of the lawsuits that Trump's team brought weren't dismissed because the investigation or a recount found that the claims were inaccurate, but they were thrown out for process-based reasons. So we never really did have an audit of the election, and that's why I think there's these lingering questions about what exactly happened.
So what happens if we put this to bed in Georgia? If it's like Trump lost and we went through these ballots, are we going to remove the January 6th website that just went up that says that he still lost the election from the administration? Is Trump going to come out and say, I lost? Like, I just can't see that even happening, but he needs to quell the worries of people.
That's kind of irrelevant to me. I mean, I just personally think a lot of people that I've talked to who felt like things were not on the up and up outside of the Trump administration would have a lot greater confidence if they were able to actually see the data.
Okay. Tom Homan promising to reduce the number of ICE officers in Minnesota, but only if local leaders start cooperating. We'll be right back. Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, indicating Thursday that DHS may reduce the number of immigrant enforcement officers in Minnesota, but there's a catch. Let's listen.
The withdrawal of law enforcement resources here is dependent upon cooperation. Like I said, one agent arresting one bad guy in jail means less agents on the street. We have some agreements. We got more to talk about how we're going to implement these agreements. But as we see that cooperation happen, then the redeployment will happen.
That comes after Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey wrote in a social media post on Tuesday that, quote, Minneapolis does not and will not enforce federal immigration laws, just hours after he and Minnesota Governor Walz met with Homan.
But despite being open to reducing the number of agents in the state, Homan says ICE won't give up on their mission there.
We're going to enforce the immigration law. For the people that saying we're here to surrender our authority and the mission of enforcing the immigration law, you are wrong. We're going to do target enforcement operations, and we're going to prioritize the public safety threats and national security threats. That is what we're here to do. We are not surrendering our mission at all. We're just doing it smarter.
Homan also had a warning for anti-ICE protesters. Take a listen.
Every First Amendment rights, I support that. You have the right to protest. I'm just asking you to keep it peaceful. But threatening law enforcement officers, engaging in impeding and obstruction and assault is never okay. And there will be zero tolerance. You interfere, impede, assault ICE officers, you will be arrested.
Meantime, Frey was in D.C. yesterday to address the U.S. Conference of Mayors, where he took aim at the Trump administration and issued this warning to his fellow mayors.
Push for this concept, calling it the iron law of the world, that might makes right. Stephen Miller is wrong. We are on the front lines of a very important battle, and it's important that we aren't silenced, that we aren't put down. This is not a time to bend our heads in despair or out of fear that we may be next, because if we do not speak up, if we do not step out, it will be your city that is next.
Meantime, the budget battle over DHS funding continues on Capitol Hill. Republicans in Congress said Thursday that the White House is on board with the Democrats' plan to separate DHS funding from the so-called minibus in order to pass the remainder of the funding package and keep the government open. But now, after objections raised by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham over the length of DHS funding and a provision related to so-called Arctic frost, the investigation that is, that deal may be up in the air. The deadline to avoid a government shutdown is midnight tonight.
Well, you know what? I think Homan being the adult in the room, I mean, he's been mature about this whole thing. He's been on like the Sunday shows and doing interviews saying we need to wait and get all the information, get all the investigation details before we rush to judgment. So I appreciate that. But he's always been super firm on immigration. And the fact that he is like the middle ground, the mediator, is so shows you how far maybe we went off the deep end, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in terms of goals, he's consistent with Christian Nationalism and other members of DHS. But the difference is that he has massive amounts of experience and actually knows how to carry out these operations. And I think Tom Homan should have been running this operation from the jump. And the fact that we let Christian Nationalism sort of lead the charge, make all of these public statements that were too quick, getting ahead of investigations, and really just, I think, trying to make this a way to build her personal profile as opposed to actually executing the mission, has been a little unserious. And I remember on this show saying when Trump was first building his cabinet that I was skeptical of the DHS secretary pick, and have always been critical of Christian Nationalism. So I'm glad to see that Tom Homan is getting his time to shine. If the reports are true that Noem and Corey Lewandowski tried to sideline him, then that is totally unacceptable and she needs to go.
I think there's a conversation that's not happening publicly between, let's say, Stephen Miller, Christian Nationalism, and the president. I think publicly facing, the president seems like he's saying, or he has been saying, Christian Nationalism is not about to lose her job. But privately, we know there's a lot of finger pointing, or even Christian Nationalism told Axios, like, I follow the direction of Stephen Miller and the president. And so that to me screams out loud, they told me to say this, so back off. And so I don't really understand what's going on, but I know that Homan said something that really sat with me, saying, like, you know, everything that we've done here has not been perfect. So he's at least acknowledging that there's room for improvement. But I think he's actually saying something that is common sense. And in this instance, I will say that Mayor Fry keeps doubling down when Walz and Trump are having a conversation. I don't think that that's appropriate. We're not at the time to keep bringing the temperature up. He has to figure out how to communicate. People are elected officials because we need them to work together. The president is also being childish by coming at Fry when Homan's in there trying to do a good job. So I'll call everybody out, but it's the time now to figure out what the next steps look like for immigration reform. And Homan is asking, well, if you allow us access to prisons, because, right, most of the country said under Biden, we don't want violent criminals in the street. So depending on people are arrested for, I guess we can litigate that later. But if they allow them access to prisons, maybe they won't be in the streets trying to find people that people are saying in factories or at work or at schoolyards.
No, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills because I've been saying this for weeks, but it's
well,
true.
No, I'm hearing what Homan is saying, but that's not what was being acted. I think when you and I talk about it, I'm like, well, the Joe Rogans and everyone else in the world is like, why are we seeing factories getting taken out? And we've debated about how much that affects the economy or opens up room for people to get higher wages and forces companies to pay Americans properly. Like, there's a lot of arguments around it. But the goal has always been for even people that were critical of Biden like me and his immigration policies, that this is what we're doing is not effective and not working. But I think taking people away from like the factories that are working and trying to build our economy also wasn't working. And so people are asking these sanctuary cities to at least look at the criminals in the jails. I think that's a better start than what we're doing here and what Kristi Noem was doing already in Minnesota, because that was not, I mean, being on the streets about a mile away from a school building is not the same thing as being near a jail. Being, at people pulling parents out of cars as they're dropping their kids off at school is not the same thing as being at a jail. I think these are drastically different measures.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. And that was the point that I was making last week, which is that when sanctuary cities don't cooperate with federal law enforcement or federal immigration officials, for them to deport people, they have to pick them up on the street, right? Because they don't honor ICE detainers at jails or at courthouses. So they're not getting a call from the police saying, hey, this guy will honor your detainer for X number of hours. If you pick him up before then, no problem, you can deport him. They don't do that. So ICE has no way of knowing when people are being released, when people are being arrested, how long they'll be held, et cetera. And you can't expect ICE officers to camp outside of every jail, right, for an unlimited amount of time. So it's just logistically incredibly useful for those local police and those local jails to work with ICE, and we haven't seen that. Now, the complicating factor here is that even if Walz and Trump make a deal, if Jacob Fry refuses to comply, I mean, I'm not sure that Tim Walz is going to be willing to put the pressure on the Minneapolis police in the local level to make Jacob Fry actually comply with the administration, because we have the local, state, and federal delineation, right, of law enforcement, and immigration is the responsibility of the federal government. The state may cooperate, but what about those local police under Jacob Fry? And so that's the sort of complicating factor. Is he going to be trying to blow up this deal that the administration's trying to cut with Minnesota?
And I think because I lived in Denver, I understand how the sanctuary cities are perceived. But before we went in with ICE officers, I think the conversation should have been had that's being had now. No matter what they said online or on social media or to constituents to get better promotion of their policies, the president should have called these mayors and local officials to figure out what a better way forward looked like, because we could have avoided a lot of what happened.
All right, up next, Don Lemon has been arrested by federal agents. Don't go anywhere. Breaking news this morning, federal agents have arrested former CNN host Don Lemon after he entered a church to cover an anti-ICE protest on January 18th.
Now, Lemon's attorney, Abby Lowell, released a statement on Instagram, writing in part, quote, instead of investigating the federal agents who killed 2 peaceful Minnesota protesters, the Trump Justice Department is devoting its time, attention, and resources to this arrest, and that is the real indictment of wrongdoing in this case. This unprecedented attack on the First Amendment and transparent attempt to distract attention from many of the crises facing this administration will not stand. Don will fight these charges vigorously and thoroughly in court.
The Trump administration had initially sought to charge Lemon and 7 others, but a magistrate judge only approved 3 of those and rejected evidence against Lemon. It is not clear what charges Lemon currently faces. Last week, Attorney General Pam Bondi announced the various arrests and wrote on X, "Listen loud and clear. We do not tolerate attacks on places of worship." So initially, after that magistrate judge rejected the attempt to bring emergency charges against Don Lemon, they appealed to a higher court, a federal court of appeals, which I think also did not allow them to have an emergency issuance of charges or issuance of a warrant, but they did find the evidence against Don Lemon for violating the FACE Act credible. So I suspect the DOJ, the reason it took longer to arrest him was because they weren't able to get that emergency order, but that didn't mean necessarily that there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. So now he's been arrested. I think it's the right move. We obviously talked about this issue back when it happened. It's pretty clear in the FACE Act that you cannot impede others' right to worship. He was embedded with and organizing with this group. He was not just following them around with a camera. In some videos, he can be heard chanting along with the protesters. He deliberately interrupted the pastor to interview him while his interview was basically him just defending the protesters interrupting this church service. And so to me, he was an active participant, and that went beyond journalism, and he became a protester and obstructed those parishioners' right to be there worshiping God.
I mean, I completely disagree. I think this is an obstruction of the First Amendment. Don Lemon was actually there documenting the experience. As you've seen Don Lemon as an independent journalist in recent months since he left CNN, he's been out and putting himself in the center of whatever is happening, the most pressing news of the day. And so he was following an organization that he understood where they were gathering and followed them all the way to the church. What he says, his account, I guess we'll see how this plays out in court, but he says he was following and documenting. And as people that understand and what journalism is all about, there's somebody who is a leader of a church who's giving a sermon probably about acceptance if it's a Christian church, because that's what the Bible teaches us, to accept people that are different than us. And so the fact that he's also preaching that, but then also running a local ICE chapter, people had questions about what his incentives are. That's a natural question that a journalist would ask. So Don Lemon asking those questions to me is not illegal. Don Lemon following a group of protesters to me is not illegal. And he didn't disrupt the worship by explaining what he's seeing protesters doing. I actually watched the live feed and he was breaking down, like, if you'll see around me, look at this. I'm explaining like a journalist does. And I think now, especially in today's society where we have tons of citizen journalists, because we allow people to take their cameras and tell us what's going on. We don't only accept what the major media outlets, the mainstream media outlets are telling us, that Don Lemon was there trying to figure out what's happening in Minneapolis. There's a lot of people who are trying to figure out what's happening in Minneapolis. I mean, in 1 month, 2 people were killed. And at the same time, we've gotten multiple incorrect statements from the federal government. We've gotten people that have quit the investigation because they were trying to figure out more and get some more dirt on Renee Good's wife and trying to prosecute her instead of looking at if it was a lawful killing of Renee Good. So this whole thing is being handled sloppily. So you would think more journalists would be there telling us exactly what's happening on the ground. And so I think that them putting Don Lemon in custody is ridiculous, and hopefully he gets out soon, because I think that once it starts happening, it really becomes this vendetta situation where President Trump doesn't like you. We don't live in an authoritarian state. So, you know, President Trump has this track record of he doesn't like you and that he comes after you, and he's proven that. And Don Lemon was even fearful of that because he went online and said, listen, I wouldn't be surprised if they continue this crusade against me, and here we are. I think this is embarrassing for our country.
I mean, he was on camera before the group went into the church, before they even got there, and winking to the camera about this operation that they were about to do. So he knew exactly what they were doing. He helped them plan this and do it with them. He was not just following along as a cameraman. He inserted himself as a protester. In my opinion, I don't think this is a personal vendetta at all. I think this is actually trying to protect these people who have a right to worship. I mean, the protesters' First Amendment right does not trump the First Amendment right to religious practice, right? That's the fundamental tension here, and that's why the FACE Act covers places of religious worship, because you have to have both of those rights protected at the same time. My right to scream doesn't trump that person's right to listen to their pastor give a sermon. And I'm curious, you know, on this Bible point you made about how, well, the Bible preaches tolerance and acceptance, so we can't enforce immigration policy. Is that the argument?
No, I think if you're supporting the administration and specifically working for ICE, President Trump has said some really damning things about specifically Somali people that makes you look at immigrants like they're lesser than. We call people illegal when humans actually can't be illegal. That's a policy
it's a legal
thing.
Term. Illegal alien.
Yeah, but it's a policy.
term.
I know, but illegal would be the actual thing that they're doing. People aren't illegal. So the thing that they're doing is illegal, which should be crossing the border.
They're in the
And so
country
this is the way that we're describing human beings, right? And humanity tells us that we don't treat people like that, especially if you're reading the Bible. And so that would be a natural question, right? That you would say, okay, so how do you justify this and this? Does it make sense? Connect the dot. That's a question to ask a pastor and also a leader of ICE. I don't think that that's a bad point to make, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Don Lemon is covering what's happening and asking a question. And as a journalist, you could like his question or not like his question, but he's allowed to ask these questions because people at home were asking these questions. Wait, the pastor is also preaching the word of what? What is he saying when he's running the ICE locally and knows that 2 people were killed and people feel unsafe and uncomfortable in Minnesota? And there needs to be federal government attention to the fact that the local government is iced out of this, and no pun intended, investigation. And people don't trust that this is going to be a fair and flawless investigation to tell us what the truth is. They're concerned with Don Lemon. And I think that that's problematic and a huge indication of where the priorities of this administration are, which are not in the right place.
The Bible also tells people to follow the law.
Exactly.
Okay.
But exactly. Don Lemon's allowed to ask those questions, is my point. He's allowed to ask about both of those questions. So how do you justify one over the other?
What I'm getting at is that you're saying that the Bible, this guy's basically a hypocrite, right? That's your argument. He's a hypocrite because he's a Christian and he's a pastor, and the Bible preaches tolerance and acceptance, which the Bible teaches a lot more than just tolerance and acceptance. I think we could agree.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So
it also teaches follow the law, but it doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't teach you to treat people inhumanely who don't follow the law.
Who is this pastor treating?
It's not. It's about the ICE interactions. 2 people died, and we're trying to make them. They're killed. They're not worth like their actions.
Did this pastor kill them?
No, but But are you championing what ICE has done? That's the question at hand. Is he championing what ICE has done in his community? Does he think this is the right way forward? Does he think that they were overly aggressive in killing Renee Good? Does he think these are questions that you could ask? I mean, you support ICE. Justify this. Are you on the side of Christy Noem, who's going to call them a domestic terrorist? I mean, that's what your leader is telling you. That's the appropriate term. She's running ICE, right? Do you align with that? These are regular journalist questions.
Not while the guy's preaching a sermon.
I'm just telling you, Don Lemon shouldn't go to jail for that. I don't think that is absurd. He was literally documenting and telling us what's going on and asking questions like journalists should. I don't think that he should be behind bars in any way. I think this is frivolous, and hopefully his lawyer gets it thrown out. That's my perspective. President Trump raised some eyebrows with his comments about housing during his cabinet meeting. We'll dive into that next. Stick around. President Trump tackling high housing costs by keeping them high. That seems to be what the president suggested during his cabinet meeting on Thursday.
Trump said instead of making housing less expensive, he wants lower interest rates, allowing Americans to buy homes even as prices rise. Take a listen.
People that own their homes, we're going to keep them wealthy. We're going to keep those prices up. We're not going to destroy the value of their homes so that somebody that didn't work very hard can buy a home. We're going to make it easier to buy. We're going to get interest rates down. There's so much talk about, we're going to drive housing prices down. I don't want to drive housing prices down. I want to drive housing prices up for people that own their homes. And they can be assured that's what's going to happen.
That call for lower interest rates came just hours before he announced on Truth Social that he was nominating Kevin Warsh for Fed chairman. Trump has been calling for lower interest rates since before he retook office last year and has been a harsh critic of current Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Trump praised Warsh in his post, writing in part, "I have known Kevin for a long period of time and have no doubt that he will go down as one of the great Fed chairmen, maybe the best. On top of everything else, he is central casting, and he will never let you down."
As for Trump's ideas to make housing more affordable, those didn't go over so well on either side of the party line. Senator Elizabeth Warren, writing in a post on X, Donald Trump seems to think that if you can't afford to buy a home in this economy, then you, quote, didn't work very hard. That's about the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, especially when millions of hardworking Americans can't afford to buy their own home. Economist Peter Schiff, taking it a step further, writing in his own post, "This is asinine. Trump wants to make the housing bubble bigger so homeowners can keep pretending they're rich by owning houses they can't sell because they're too expensive for anyone to buy."
And even conservative commentator Mike Cernovich seemed critical, writing simply, "This is a miss on housing" from Trump. Yeah, I think that's right. Spoken like a true real estate developer, I want the housing prices to just increase forever. I was cracking up when I was listening to this because as a homeowner, I was like, I do want my housing price to go up.
Yeah, that's the struggle. You're like, yeah.
And I do like lower interest rates. But of course, when we're looking nationwide, beyond my own selfish reasons for wanting my home price to go up, which I actually probably shouldn't go up much more because, you never want to be the most expensive house in the neighborhood. But nonetheless, on the nationwide scale, obviously housing has become very unaffordable for people. It's the number one thing people are citing when they're talking about concerns about the future of the economy and their economic fortunes. This has to be done, I think, in a skillful and smart way. You have to increase housing supply, absolutely. Now, I think that the mass deportation operation would be helpful in freeing up some of that supply, right, and lessening the demand, because you'll have, at this point already, we have 2 million fewer people who are competing for shelter with American citizens, which I think is good. Interest rates are obviously a huge part of it. I think reprioritizing FHA loans to first-time homebuyers and young Americans over refugees and immigrants could be useful as well, but it's not going to be a simple fix. I really appreciated Trump's plan too, which has bipartisan support from people like Senator Warren and Senator Bernie Sanders, as well as Josh Hawley on the Republican side, to ban institutional investors from gobbling up single-family homes and jacking up rent on them. So I didn't like these comments. They were obviously not helpful. They were super tone deaf. But I think if we look at the policy, there's some good moves happening.
Yeah, the average home, according to Redfin in November last year, was about $433,000, which is really high. I mean, when you think about how our parents bought houses, I know the income was way different, but it's almost out of control. And I felt the same way. I'm like, well, yeah, I'd like my prices to go high, but I also want somebody to be able to rent it. As somebody in the situation right now, I have a home in Denver that I'm not actively living in. I'd like to rent it out. I don't want to sell it right now, but I don't want it to be unaffordable for anybody to buy when I am ready to sell it. And I think his January 20th banning institutional investors from buying property was a good sign. So this is kind of like, I'm not understanding what the policy is. I'm like, wait, you want it to go up? Because I think the people that it really will cause a friction for is those first-time home buyers.
Right.
They're not going to be able to afford to get into the housing game, which we know is the number one way to accrue wealth in this country. And I think we're going to start to, again, create that disparity between the have and the have-nots. And I think people understand, Jerome Powell understands, that lowering the interest rates when the market doesn't call for it potentially has the risk of causing chaos down the line and, not being the best. So Trump might be in office for the next few years. It might be good, but then it might cause almost like another recession or another area like we're having right now where people are financially uncomfortable. And when you think about the lowering the interest rates, I think the demand and then the bidding wars that happen when you lower the interest rate on houses cause it to people to overbid. That was happening to me during the pandemic when I bought my home. Houses were not worth what people were paying for them, but people who were buying their first home were really excited. I couldn't justify paying $50,000 over what it was being appraised for, right? But people who have more money and more means were able to outbid it. It was like you're creating the situation where the houses are not even worth what they're worth. So when this bubble pops, your house is still worth $200,000, $300,000, whatever. It's not worth the amount because now they overpaid for it.
It's especially weird in the DC area because there's just always going to be massive demand for housing here. And so we went through a similar situation when we bought our house in 23 in Northern Virginia, where people were not doing inspections. They were doing all cash offers, $100,000 over the asking price. It was wild. Yeah, it was absolutely wild. And, as young people wanting to start a family at some point and trying to get in, it was really just demoralizing.
And I will
honestly
say, I'm so surprised. I thought that we were in close to a recession. So I came out here green-eyed, it's going to be I'm going to get the lowest prices when I'm looking. Things are flying off the shelves out here. People are still paying higher. And I'm like, what's up with DC? Is everybody comfortable, extremely comfortable? Everything we report on does not affect anyone in DC. Especially the government was shut down for months. I'm like, there's got to be something that's going to be reasonably priced out here. And I find that everything is extremely expensive. Maybe it's just that shock from coming from anywhere that's not New York, LA, or DC to understand what the prices are in those three cities, but it's pretty expensive.
Right, and when we bought the interest rate was 7.5, so.
Oof. Wow,
yep.
Wow.
Up next, we'll talk about Minnesota Governor Tim Walz saying he will never run for office again. Stay with us.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz says he will never run for an elected office again.
Bummer. In an interview with MS Now on Wednesday, Walz described himself as a political lightning rod and explained his decision, saying there are other ways to serve the public. Let's listen.
No political consideration. Will never run for an elected office again.
Never again.
Never again. And I will just do the work. And what I found is, again, I'm going to say this. There's heroes on the streets that we don't know their names. They're never going to run for office. And those grass-top leaders brought this administration to their knees this week to do something about it. So there's other ways to serve, and I'll find them.
Now, Walz's decision came after federal officers shot and killed Renee Good and Alex Preddy in Minneapolis. Walz told MS Now, quote, "I know they hate me personally, and they take it out on my constituents."
Last month, Walz announced that he would not seek re-election after coming under scrutiny for an alleged fraud scandal in Minnesota.
Walz referred to the fraud scandal as a crisis where the Trump administration was trying to, quote, score a few cheap points.
Minnesota House Speaker Lisa DeMuth said in a statement last month, if Democrats think they can sweep Minnesota's fraud scandal away by swapping out Tim Walz, they are wrong. Every Democrat in Minnesota has spent years enabling criminals who stole our tax dollars, with still no meaningful accountability and no end in sight to the billions in fraud that still plagues nearly every government program imaginable, thanks to 16 years of Democrat control.
Now, Walz, who lost his bid as the 2024 running mate of presidential candidate Kamala Harris, is an Army National Guard veteran and had served 6 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. That's what I was going to say. He's a 6-term congressman. Like, I know that he dropped the ball with the fraud.
Big time.
Right? I'm not going to sit here. I told Robbie that when we first brought it up. Okay. His response in December last year was not appropriate. Too little, too late, right? But, 2-term governor, I think he did what he could, gave it a good college try. This was a major, I'm trying.
Oh my gosh.
No, for real. This moment is a really serious moment for Minnesota, right? The whole world is looking at Minnesota and saying, not only were we staring at the state as a whole and the city about what's going on with fraud, I think it needs to be wider spread and look at what happened after the pandemic when federal rules were lax and people were taking advantage of the system. I mean, there's billions that need to be recovered in fraud money across in Republican states like Ohio also, but we're looking at Minnesota, right? So fine.
Well,
but I think
the DOJ does have actually a specialized unit for pandemic fraud, which they are still prosecuting. They got a bunch of people for unemployment fraud in Maryland recently.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people have already been convicted, or like this has been going on for years that they're looking into people. So I just hate that it's only Minnesota, and then it got exacerbated by ICE being there and by 2 people dying this month. I think a lot is going on for Minnesota, and I think it's a good thing that Walz is self-aware and steps to the side. He knows that he's a direct target, not only because he ran with Kamala, but anything he does is kind of reflecting the entire state right now. And I think the state is exhausted and has somebody like Amy Klobuchar, who I think, that's a possibly good moderate option for governor to take his position. And I know people are saying, like, Democrats don't handle this well, but she's coming from a clean slate. She's saying, like, I have this moderate, pragmatic approach. I've worked across the aisle in many capacities. I've served in the Senate since 2007, and I think I can get things done. I mean, Amy Klobuchar is not, she's not a Mamdani. I think she has a different approach to how to negotiate across the aisle. And hopefully there'll be some, I agree. Anybody scamming the system or being a criminal should go to jail. Like, this is simple things to say. And I know there was a little bit of apprehension on Walz's part for looking into the Somali community because he felt like the optics might look a little absurd. And I think that that's, unfair. If somebody's committing a crime, look into it. And I think that hopefully Amy Klobuchar can take that perspective. Hopefully she can work with Fry and or talk to him early and say what her next steps with ICE would be. Maybe she can step in this conversation with Homan and say what she would do. And I think that would show her as a leader that actually is solution oriented and not just trying to scream on the mic like we've seen Walz and Fry doing back to President Trump.
Yeah, I saw some reporting that one of the reasons Democrats were excited about Klobuchar running is because she has no connection to the fraud scandal. She's outside of it. She hasn't raked in a bunch of political donations from the Somali community like Walz and some of the people in his cabinet, which is now being investigated, whether or not he swept the fraud under the rug, not just for the optics reasons, but also potentially for political reasons. She doesn't have that issue lingering around her, so she is able to come in with a clean slate if she were to win. So I think you're right about that. Now, when Tim Walz said there are heroes on the streets, you never know their names, they don't ever run for office, I'm pretty sure he was talking about us.
Us?
Right? Yeah. We're the heroes. We'll never run for office, but we're doing.
So you think he's going to get into TV?
No, I'm just kidding.
No, but I was wondering, there are a lot of organizations. Does he want to run a nonprofit? Like, what does he want to do?
Maybe he wants to join Minnesota Ice Watch.
I definitely don't think that that's happening. But I also think this is a moment where we open the door for the next generation. A lot of conversations that Robbie and I often have is the fact that people stay in positions when it's past due, that they, and not that Klobuchar is the next generation of young leadership, but just the idea that he moves to the side and knows when it's time, as opposed to those leaders in other positions throughout Congress or the federal government that are like, no, I'm staying here till I have a cane walking out of here, and you've been embattled in so many ways, but just defiant. And so I think being self-aware in this way, he had a lot of things coming, but we've seen politicians in the past who just double down and want to stay in their position until they get voted out. And it's like, just make it easier for the person that you'd like to succeed, like to come after you, and not make it harder for the entire party by your ego taking over this moment.
Yeah, that's true. I am curious to see how he closes out his tenure. I mean, him and Jacob Fry, I think that's a powder keg waiting to explode, because Jacob Fry is running around saying, don't work with the Trump administration. We're not going to do anything with ICE. Walz has been a little bit more sane on that issue. But as we talked about earlier, there's this delineation between state and local law enforcement and then the feds coming in, where I think Jacob Fry could really give him a hard time in his last little time left in office.
For sure. I think everyone should be on the common ground that American citizens dying in Minnesota should never happen again. I also understand that we had new video of, I believe, the tail light of one of the ICE cars being broken by Alex Preddy, and so we should also not be protesting in that way. And you're allowed to protest, right? Use your rights and speak up, but let's not damage property. There's a way
as
that
Homan said, keep it peaceful, right? Like, don't obstruct proceedings. Don't use your cars to block people. Don't be assaulting officers. You can be out there with your stupid whistles and blow your whistle or whatever, and that's fine. But as soon as you start trying to get involved in a law enforcement proceeding, things get chaotic, and it's basically becomes a fog of war situation. And I think, tragedies like the Renee Good and Alex Preddy shooting could be avoided if everyone just stood back and stayed peaceful.
Including ICE.
Well, they're doing their jobs.
Well, we argued the excessive force thing, but we're not going to rehash the thing.
Yeah.
We'll let the courts litigate.
All right, up next, legendary rock musician Bruce Springsteen is calling out President Trump and ICE in his latest song. We'll be right back with more on that. Singer-songwriter Bruce Springsteen has become the latest artist to speak out against the Trump administration.
On Wednesday, he released an anti-ICE protest song titled Streets of Minneapolis, which he says he wrote over the weekend following the death of Alex Preddy. The song takes direct aim at immigration enforcement in the city with lyrics including, quote, King Trump's private army from the DHS, guns belted to their coats, came to Minneapolis to enforce the law, or so goes their story.
Springsteen also directly calls out DHS Secretary Christian Nationalism and Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, accusing them of lying about the circumstances surrounding Preddy's death. The White House did respond, but was dismissive of the song. Spokesperson Abigail Jackson said in a statement shared with The Hill, the Trump administration is focused on encouraging state and local Democrats to work with federal law enforcement officers on removing dangerous, criminal, illegal aliens from their communities, not random songs with irrelevant opinions and inaccurate information.
But the song was celebrated by Democrats such as Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar. She writes on X, quote, thank you, Bruce Springsteen, for Streets of Minneapolis, a powerful tribute to Renee Good and Alex Preddy and to the strength of the people of Minnesota. Now, Springsteen has a long history of criticizing President Trump. Last year at a concert in England, he told his audience that America was, quote, in the hands of a corrupt, incompetent, and treasonous administration. Trump responded to that by calling the singer a jerk and saying he's, quote, not a talented guy. Very high-level conversations being had on X.
Well, I'm a notorious Bruce Springsteen hater, always have been.
Hater? I thought you were going to say fan.
No, I've never liked his music, so I am a little bit biased here. I think the song is terrible. And I do want to, defend a little bit that I have some objectivity here, even though I admitted to having some bias, because I actually love a lot of left-wing protest songs that I probably should have no business liking. Ohio by Crosby, Stills and Nash, absolute legendary song. I love Rage Against the Machine. So I'm not some I can't listen to this song because it's against my politics. It's just so heavy-handed and kind of cringe, I think, this particular one.
Well, I think, artists have the ability to connect with tons of people through their art, and in his case, it's music. And, a lot of people did have a lot of emotions around the fact that Renee Good was killed, and also Alex Preddy was killed. I mean, there was a ton of feelings, whether you supported ICE's actions or supported them protesting and felt that there was an unlawful killing. I mean, the world was paying attention. It was one of those moments where the world is looking like, what can we do? And people sometimes feel helpless, especially those people in Minnesota, which is what Amy Klobuchar was referring. No matter what side they're on, they're looking and saying, this is not how our country should look. This is not what we want. And so he's putting a song out. He's saying that Trump is not a king. He's saying that you coming in there and being heavy-handed and your staff or administration saying incorrect information was not appropriate. And so he kind of put words to how people were feeling. Now, I don't know if I'm blasting it on my car ride home today. I'm not going to lie. Like, heal the world, make it a better place. Like, that song was more, translates into a variety of situations. I know that they were coming together to try to tackle some of the world's issues. And did the song actually tackle issues? I mean, it might have raised money, but it didn't handle the actual issues. Music generally doesn't, but maybe it gets people ignited to want to do something, whether that's get out and vote or, be active, go protest or donate to ICE like we've seen people do, or the people, the officers that are on leave. People can do whatever they want, but the song is him doing his part as opposed to going to some Golden Globes event and just like wearing a pin. He created music. He did what he gets paid for on his own time to contribute to the conversation, which I think is noble and fine.
That's fine. Yeah. I guess I just, from an artistry perspective,
you can't judge art. They're sensitive about their work.
I know they get really upset, but it's like, Christian Nationalism is evil. It's like, can we be a little more creative? It's like, he basically just like took a bunch of Blue Sky posts and threw them in a song.
But if you think about it, like, and I let you have the floor being critical of Christian Nationalism. Imagine the families of the people that got killed, whether you feel like they were in the wrong or the right, and seeing somebody label your kid as a domestic terrorist and overcharge what they don't even know yet. That would be concerning as anybody who could just look at it like relation to or knowing or working with or loving or having a family with or any of these people that got killed, a parent. And so it's just like, can we just get the facts? So the decency of getting the facts, I think it's worth calling Christian Nationalism out on.
No, I agree. I agree. I think it needs to be handled seriously, and just say what you should say in any law enforcement situation like this, any shoot, which is we're doing an investigation, we're gathering all the facts, and we're going to see where they lead.
Let's not jump to conclusions. Tom Homan said it. Everyone else can say it, right? Now that does it for us on Rising Live. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way. I know that you'll be watching YouTube this weekend. They post our clips over the weekend, so that makes me excited to watch all weekend long. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen on the go, we're available anywhere you listen to podcasts. So listen to us all over again over the weekend. We'll see you guys on Monday. See ya. Bye.
Former First Lady Hillary Clinton writing an op-ed for The Atlantic where she argues that the MAGA crowd has lost their empathy and is attempting to replace democracy with theocracy.
She accuses the Trump administration of abandoning Christian values and says there is a, quote, moral rot at the heart of the MAGA movement. Clinton writes, quote, the glorification of cruelty and rejection of compassion don't just shape the Trump administration's policies. Those values are also at the core of Trump's own character and worldview, and they have become a rallying cry for hard-right Christian influencers who are waging a war on empathy. As an example, Clinton goes on to call out Allie Beth Stuckey, the Christian podcaster and author of the 2024 book Toxic Empathy. She accuses Stuckey of manipulating her fellow Christian conservatives and believes she is afraid of what would happen if they were to take a more empathetic view on cultural issues. Clinton says, quote, maybe they recognize the humanity of an undocumented immigrant family and decide that mass deportation has gone too far, or they make space in their heart for a young rape survivor forced to carry a pregnancy to term and start questioning the wisdom and morality of total abortion bans. It's all toxic to Stuckey.
The article from the former First Lady drew a lot of attention online, and Stuckey herself responded to it. She wrote on X, when Hillary Clinton is writing 6,000-word op-eds in The Atlantic attacking warnings against toxic empathy, you know you're over the target. Keep going. And writer Zaid Jilani says it might be stronger if she didn't just do a splashy event in Saudi Arabia where she sat next to a dude who butchered a journalist. This is why the Democratic Party badly needs to move away from such inauthentic people. At least Trump is no filter.
I mean, like we all can agree that Trump doesn't have like top tier moral fiber, right? He does things that are unsavory. Sometimes people like his policies and not his antics. Like that doesn't mean that I don't know what she feels about him. I know that she really doesn't get along with him, but they both said things about each other. But Trump is not like the ideal. Like I wouldn't tell my son, oh, grow up and be acting like Trump acts like. Like I wouldn't. I don't have a son. I would say if I did. But I think to just say overly, when I read this article, I thought that she's overgeneralizing the MAGA movement. I think that she has to understand, because 70 plus million people voted for President Trump, that MAGA and the Republican Party as a whole includes working class voters, right? Everybody's not this monolith of a thinker that has the same opinions. It includes some libertarians. Like sometimes Robbie might agree with some of the things they're saying. It includes some people who just hate Democrats. So anything they say, or just love Trump and blindly will be allegiant. But this is not the whole party. It makes up different people. And I think so that's where I would criticize her. But to back up her point a little bit, when she brings up the fact that there are big voices in the MAGA movement, like Megyn Kelly, who said, look, I'm supposed to feel bad about Alex Preddy. I don't. That's like rude and obnoxious when somebody just died. Like the right decorum in that moment, right? Especially as a Christian, if I don't know if Megyn Kelly is, would be to say, this is a terrible situation. You could feel however you feel about Alex Preddy and his past protesting. You could feel however you feel about ICE, but saying, I don't care, that's not how we're raised, right? That's like, if we're talking about moral fiber. And then also the propelling of racist neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes, who I think is part of subscribes more to the MAGA movement than anything else. I think that the fact that his voice is building up so much within the party, that's problematic. And so when you talk about unifying and some of the things that I guess are supposed to be Christian values, this is a legitimate criticism of when you look at like white nationalism. It's usually supported by people within MAGA movement, so this is like connection that people are making, and people have tried to distance themselves from it. I think it's part of the chaos, if you will call it, at the Turning Points Convention, when they're trying to separate a lot of different part of the right-wing coalition and say, are we really going to embrace some of this racism? Are we going to embrace all this negativity? Or are we going to just stand up to people that don't stand for the same things we stand for, so we can clearly say our party is this, not this? And I think that that's a little bit of a conundrum that might be happening within the party right now that she's addressing.
Well, I would just point out that Nick Fuentes has been actually pretty anti-Trump this second term, but he doesn't consider himself MAGA, just a point of clarification there. But I think it's interesting that she kind of contradicts herself, where she starts with this point that we talked about, where she accuses the MAGA movement or the Trump administration of replacing democracy with theocracy. But then she says that they're not doing Christianity right. So it's like, well, do you want them to be more Christian in your view of what Christian means? Or do you want them to leave religion out of it altogether? Like, those points are in contradiction with one another. But I also think it's kind of rich that people who are advocating for the separation of Christian moral principles and values from politics, which is, technically impossible. We all get our moral code from somewhere. If you get yours from a Christian perspective, then the idea that shouldn't somehow inform the way you look at politics, I think is sort of not human. Like, that's not accounting for human behavior in reality. But it's like always the people who want to separate those two things who then tell other Christians that they're not like being the right Christian, or they're not being Christian enough. And there's this meme about it that Christians often share with each other online, which is like, I don't subscribe to your religion, but if I point to this line in this giant book that you read and tell you that this is what should inform your entire worldview, then you must listen to me. And it's like, okay, I didn't see you in the pews on Sunday,
I think that Hillary Clinton in this moment is taking the opportunity to seize a big moment, to keep her name in a current moment. I think
she loves to do that.
Like to write this article in such a big publication, it talks about the moment that's at hand. So she makes valid points, like talking about the fact that she feels MAGA is leaning into more of an authoritarian state by doing some of the things that they're doing with ICE. Like, I don't think that a lot of people would like to see our streets militarized in any way. And we can go back to the root of the cause of democratic sanctuary cities and all that stuff. But I think that she's pointing out what people have a growing concern of being uncomfortable with, and also trying to probably position the party to look at what the next few months will bring as we head into midterms, right? There's a lot of wind beneath the wings of Democrats if they come up with a plan to get them to the midterms, because of how the economy's doing, because of the dissatisfaction with the way that ICE is going about things. And so I think if those are their two pillars of things that are not working well with Republican leadership, that's a point. But then they also have to have some policies laid out that is their intention for the way forward that makes sense, because just saying we're not like Trump is not, that doesn't work anymore.
I wanted to get into her point about toxic empathy too, which is this the title of a book that Allie Beth Stuckey wrote. And I think she kind of misunderstands the concept, Hillary Clinton does, because the idea that Allie Beth is talking about with toxic empathy is when empathy becomes such a driving force in politics that it ends up getting applied to the wrong situations and people. So, for example, we were told in the sort of defund the police days and the progressive criminal justice reform days of 2020 and the aftermath that in order to be just and empathetic, that we had to soften crime laws, that we were going to do, no cash bail, we were going to get rid of mandatory minimums and 3 strikes laws, and that was empathetic to criminals. But we didn't seem to have the same level of empathy applied to victims of violent crime. And so that's where that toxicity comes in, is when our empathy is manipulated to be applied to people who maybe don't deserve, or at least from a political perspective, it doesn't make sense for those people to have more empathy than people who are actually facing the negative consequences of their behavior.
I agree. I think Obama talked about this during his presidency in regards to specifically immigration. There's a lot of conversation around having empathy for people that are fleeing dire circumstances. You'll hear me say that, and I think that that is valid, and why we should try to get people the asylum that they deserve if they are in a dire circumstance and our country allows it. But at the same time, for people that are just coming to America without the correct channels, there are tons of people that are waiting in line and doing it the right way. And I have plenty of friends that have immigrant families that are also like, man, we waited 15 years to get our whole family here. And like, you would be surprised how many immigrants are like, there's a right way to do this. Can we go about the right channels and go through the right procedures? And so there is this thing where you have to blanketly agree that we should just be fine with all immigration policies. I'm one of those people that's going to say what was under Biden wasn't working. And I think that there has to be procedures in place and we need to be following the law. But I also think there needs to be humanity involved. And so hopefully what Hillary Clinton and Stuckey were saying are similar, is that going too far in the empathetic direction to anyone specifically is not the right way to go, because you could be isolating an entire community that's either a victim of a crime or doing things the right way with migration. And so there's just a lot of nuance here. But I think when it starts to become chaotic, Hillary Clinton saw this moment to kind of speak on it and point the finger when there's a lot of conversation, which is what I've been saying from the beginning, a dialogue that has to be had between the mayors that want to just lead in empathy, which is totally noble. I get it. But you have to lead in some kind of order and chaos. Otherwise, you're incentivizing people to continue to come here.
That's right.
And so even I lived in Denver and I get it.
Yeah.
And, that's why I can speak from a perspective of, okay, I lived in this purple state and I understand the empathy part. But I also understand how chaotic it gets when the hotel down the block from your house is full of migrants and my parents can't even get a room there because it's just chaos on the streets. People are watching your windows, out of nowhere, running up to the car. It just doesn't need to be chaotic. We can do this the right way and incentivize migrants to do it the right way.
Yeah, and look, I think one of the things that, at least Catholicism teaches is that having empathy for people does not require you to give up your own boundaries or allow people to treat you like crap, right? Like, you are still allowed to defend yourself and have order and consequences for bad behavior when people mistreat you. You're not just required to always turn the other cheek, which is sort of like a commonly misunderstood Christian teaching, because it's this helpful phrase and idiom that people like to use, or analogy rather. But it's obviously a much more nuanced and complicated than that.
Yeah.
And so I often get frustrated when people are like, well, you just need to be nice to people. Aren't you a Christian? You just need to be nice. It's like, well, I don't need to be nice to someone who's being a jerk to me and treating me like crap, right? Like, that's not it. There's a lot more going on here, right?
All right, we'll leave it there. Up next, we will discuss how the birth rate is declining in the United States and also globally, but a certain political group seems to be defying that. We'll be right back. The term White House baby boom is trending as several members of the Trump administration shared news that their families are growing. From Vice President J.D. Vance and Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt to Deputy Chiefs of Staff Stephen Miller and James Blair, a baby boom is underway at the White House.
The Wall Street Journal, in an article titled "MAGA Women Defy the Birth Dearth," notes that in the 1970s, there was little to no partisan difference in birth rates, with average women expecting 2.1 children across her lifetime. A partisan fertility gap has emerged over the years, with conservatives having more children than liberals. While Democrats are increasingly the party of the childless, Republicans are increasingly the party of parents.
In 2024, the U.S. total fertility rate drastically decreased to 1.63 children. Go ahead.
The Institute for Family Studies found that counties where President Trump received less than 25% of votes had a median total fertility rate of 1.31, as compared to counties in which the vote share for Trump was more than 75%, had a total fertility rate of 1.84.
It's not just the United States. Over the past half century, almost all of the richest countries in the world have seen a reduction in the total fertility rate. But now even the less rich countries like Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Thailand, and Turkey are less fertile than America.
A research by the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation shows that by 2050, over 3/4 of countries will not have fertility rates high enough to sustain their population over time. So why is the birth rate declining?
Well, the article mentions an interesting quote saying, "For those who blame feminism, Iran's total fertility rate 1.6 is a problem. For those who blame liberalism, North Korea's rate of 1.8 is a problem. For those who blame a lack of state-funded childcare, Norway's rate of 1.4 is a problem."
The article also talks about an analysis by the Financial Times that shows that across all the developed countries, conservatives are having almost as many children as they were a few decades ago. It's on the progressive left where birth rates have fallen.
This is so funny to me because I just feel like I'm completely women, a feminist. Women should have babies if they want to. I think they can have them if they don't. If they don't have to have them, they don't want to. And I think the conversation, like calling women who maybe lean to the left, like Taylor Swift, Cat Lady, and all the stuff that happened in the past, I think it's just so demeaning because there's so much that's going on. People can make choices now. And I think as somebody who I never had this idea in my mind of exactly how my life was going to look. Some people grow up and I'm going to have my best friend. I'm going to have 5 kids. And she went about it and got started super early. I was surprised to be pregnant and I was happy about it. But that's life. And I think the fact that I have this booming career and I folded my child into my life and now we brilliantly make it work out how it works for us are these beautiful options that women have these days. And the constant back and forth about conservative or a liberal woman, especially when we see what's going on in other countries that don't even have access to the same things that we have access to. There's still declining birth rates. So it's not, the ideology connection doesn't really make sense. I think it's important to not keep having that conversation. It seems archaic to keep having that conversation and allow women to just make the choices. We know historically women didn't have as many choices, getting the right to vote later and all the other things. And so now that women are working more and chasing dreams, it can work in conjunction with children. You can decide not to have children, but it all is a choice. And that to me is a beautiful thing.
What do you think explains that partisan gap, though, in the U.S., where liberal women are having fewer children than conservative women? Why do you think they make that choice not to have children more often?
I don't know. I guess if you're looking historically at fighting for women's rights and wanting to advance women so that they're on the same exact playing field as their counterparts of men, then maybe people with that choice, as those rights were won, decided to continue to pursue whether it's education or career or just admittedly, some of my friends just actually don't want kids. One of my friends lives in Bali full time and writes for several magazines as a travel writer and was that a kid doesn't work for our lifestyle. Every 3 months we move to Thailand, wherever we're going to move. And that's what she likes to do. To me, my parents' generation having that conversation would be absurd. To my grandma, for sure. She'd be like, what's wrong with your friend? She needs to go to the doctor. And some people are like, no, we have autonomy now, which I think is a beautiful thing. I'm not sure what makes people have kids or don't have kids. I know that younger people and the demographics are probably continuously going to change because younger people don't feel so aligned with either party, right? They're starting to be more independent as these polls have come out. And younger people also are drinking less, right? Maybe millennials are supposed to be the most drunk generation. Maybe we didn't have babies because we were too drunk. Who knows? I'm not really sure what the reasoning is, but I do think that the choice is a good thing. and that young kids are making their own economies with the digital space. They're walking into offices, and my aunt works in HR in a big company, and says, like, people who are younger than you walk in my office out of college talking about, well, I would like to make $100,000. And she's like, what the heck? Like, I remember we were happy with whatever. I was happy with that, whatever I got my first job. And so I just think that there is a courage and a bravery in making your own decisions, whatever that looks like as a woman. And I'm not sure that I'm going to accept that it just has to do with party.
I think part of the explanation is that women are just making different choices. But I will say, you know, looking back at my childhood and going through school, I feel like, especially in the millennial generation, and maybe you experience this too, there was definitely a shift of focus in the way that we raised young girls to really more highly value career and ambition and sort of chasing money. And the idea of the stay-at-home mom seemed a little less in vogue. Like, it wasn't
For sure.
cool, right?
Yeah.
And so I wonder if a lot of us were sort of inculcated with this idea that success was defined differently than having a family, and if that sort of subconsciously drove some of us to think more about the, you know, being in Bali and writing for the magazines,
Right.
as opposed to prioritizing family. My concern, because people are allowed to do what they want. I don't want to force anybody to have kids. It's not The Handmaid's Tale, despite all the costumes we often see outside here in DC. But my concern is that we have higher levels of unhappiness as women, particularly young women. Our rates of depression and anxiety are rising faster than ever. And we do see a difference when we study happiness and fulfillment and how people feel about their lives, that people who are married and have children tend to rate higher levels of happiness. And so I am just always constantly wondering if there is this connection between a prioritizing of career for a lot of women in our generation and the declining levels of happiness. And are we missing out on perhaps true fulfillment by eschewing family creation?
And I think that there's nuance here. I have friends that are approaching 40 and saying, I don't know if I'm going to have a kid, and like contemplating what that means to them, and if they really care, or if they care that the option's being taken away, because it gets harder as you get older.
Right.
So I get that that's a real feeling too. And I don't know. I think that people have to figure out what works well for them. I don't know that if I had planned out a kid that I would have had one immediately at the time that I did, but now that it works, it's just chaotic and beautiful, and we're just going to work it out. And so that's what I mean. It's like, I don't know what to say, because also I don't think you should be in an unhappy relationship just because you want a family. And some people will be like, well, it's time to settle down, and this is a good man or a good woman. It's like, don't do that either. I don't know that leads to long-term happiness. Maybe in studies they're saying that on a poll, but are you really happy? You go to bed at night, you tell us. So that's kind of the thing that women and men probably have to grapple with, is like, what do you want? Sit with yourself at night and figure that out. Because if you want kids, like my other best friend who's adamant about it, well, she started at 23. And if she wants that many kids, she's going to have no issue. She had all her kids, and they're all grown now, and she has her big life. And she's about to start a whole new chapter at 40 where she can explore with her husband in any way she likes, because her kids are pretty much grown. Mm-hmm. And so I think that you have to think about that. And I think we should start having conversations with women, young women particularly, about planning that. Because a lot of my friends didn't even freeze their eggs that wanted to have kids.
We got to be real. We have to be real with women, because I think a lot of them believe that with scientific advancements that they can just get pregnant whenever. It's not that easy.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Definitely not. So, I mean, we can go on. Obviously, we like this topic. Yeah. We can talk about this for hours. We have a lot more to talk about on Rising. Stay with us.